So I read through your dramatization. I thought it was a really interesting topic to pick for this. You wouldn't really think that, picking an ambulance provider for a fire department could cause such drama, or I guess for a county really. So I thought it was interesting how you developed that. I thought you did a really good job with the four-part dramatic structure. I understood where you were going, where the complication was, how you were developing it. I thought the climax was really good. You just ended it with they were defeated, and then you move right into the resolution. So that was very clear and easy to follow. And even with your individual scenes, I thought you did a pretty good job of following that four-part structure. Talking about the runs to International Village and Shady Oaks. You definitely had that four-part structure going there. I saw a point of resolution. I saw an actual, or point of insight rather, a resolution, all of those kind of things within those individual scenes. The commissioner's scene, I thought maybe you could have developed your four-part structure there a little bit more. I wasn't sure if you saw the point of insight as when they were allowed to start their own ambulance shared between the three townships, or when you said that the private ambulance provider could sue. I wasn't sure what exactly you wanted the punch there to be, so maybe just kind of look at that. But overall, I thought you had a good grasp on the four-part structure. One thing that kind of threw me off, I thought it was very interesting, and I actually like how you did this. You started with the run to International Village, and then your point of insight came back there. It was full circle, and I really like how that worked. That's kind of what we saw in the choice, and so I thought you did that effectively. But you also tried to do that with the ambulance run to Shady Oaks, and that's where I thought it started to break down a little bit. You're covering a large amount of time, and so the way you broke it into scenes and included a date with each scene really helped to move that forward. But I got kind of confused and lost in the sequence when, we were at Shady Oaks, suddenly we're at the commissioners, and then we're back at Shady Oaks, and that, I did not follow that as well. So I think keeping International Drive two separate times at the beginning and as the point of insight is good. I like how you did that. But with Shady Oaks, I would maybe cut that down to just one reference, particularly after the commissioners meeting, because I think it's more effectively used there to show that, although they were able to find this compromise, the commissioners gave them approval, the problem didn't go away. And you don't necessarily get that as much the first time. It seems like just kind of a repeat of International Drive. And actually, when I first read it, I didn't understand why we were having these two kind of similar scenes back to back. But now that I see what you were doing, I think it would just be best to eliminate the first reference and keep it, excuse me, just the latter half of the story after you've talked about how the commissioners gave them approval. So one thing I think that you could also benefit from is the use of dialogue, more natural dialogue. In the story, you have several quotes from your dad, good quotes. I mean, when you're talking about, you quote him as saying fire chiefs have an obligation to improve service. That's a really good thing to have. It shows the levity of the situation, and it shows his thoughts on it. But I feel like there's just a better way to work that in. I might have said this last time, but I feel like when you use the direct quotes from what seems to be an interview or just, a conversation between you and your dad, it feels more like a traditional news story than it does literary journalism. And so what I suggested in my written critique is, maybe ask your dad, hey, did you have this conversation with other fire chiefs about, this obligation that they have to improve service, or were these thoughts in your head? And I think if he says yes, I thought that myself, or we had this conversation about it, work it in that way. Work in this conversation with another chief, or work in his internal monologue, because I think that would really strengthen the story. As it read as a very expository piece, which isn't necessarily bad, but I think for it to feel more like a true dramatization, you need more of that dialogue. And so I think that quote is just one example. You had another quote where your dad was telling the other firemen, we're not going to fight the private ambulance provider. And that quote I liked because it was a true conversation. And so I think maybe look to that as kind of your point of reference, focusing more on actual conversations. Or if you're going to use a direct quote, try to find a way, ask them, was this your actual thought, and frame it as an internal monologue. So the other thing I thought you could maybe improve on was more showing and less telling. So you do this pretty effectively in the scenes describing the ambulance runs to Shady Oaks and International Village, you talk about your dad tightening his grip on the wheel or whatever he was holding on to, things like that, that show the tension and show how he was feeling. But in other scenes, you're very heavy on expository writing, and it's effective. I get what you're saying, but I just think there are ways to show it more dramatically. So what I suggested in my written critique was to look at the commissioners' meeting. We don't really know anything about the commissioners based on your story. You tell us there are 3 of them. You tell us they approve the idea, but that's about it. So, you have one commissioner asking a question. Well, what was her question, her tone of voice when she was asking? Did she sound encouraging? Did she sound reserved? How were their facial expressions during the meeting? Did they seem to show any allegiance to one side or the other? Just, and that really, I would take a look at the entire narrative as a whole, not just that scene. I just thought that was a good example. But I just think there were opportunities where you could really flesh it out and rely more on those status details and sensory details and things like that to really strengthen the story. So, nice job.